Hello, I'm Carol Warren, and I'm going to share a lesson today titled Independence, Revolution, and George, the Events of the Revolutionary War. This is a 5th grade lesson that will take 2 class periods. The overview of our lesson is that we know the importance of the Revolutionary War and all the events around it to the beginning of our country, so it's also important for our students to recognize the significance of these events. So in the lesson, the students will be learning about the Revolutionary War and how it was impacted by 3 things: geographic features, the issuance of the Declaration of Independence, and the actions of George Washington. Our materials include a book by Rosalind Shancer called George versus George. We'll be using that book to actually teach the lessons. We have several worksheets, and we also have some copies of the Declaration of Independence. And we have a couple of maps. We'll be using a world map for teacher projection and a map of the American colonies also for teacher projection. At the end of the lesson, we hope the students will be able to describe how geographic features influence the Revolution, also to identify some of the principles and ideals of the Declaration and why it was important during our Revolutionary period, and also the contributions of George Washington during both the Revolutionary War and in the creation of our new American government. Again, in this book, we'll be using just sections or various pages of George versus George. Now, if you wish, you can certainly assign the reading or read the entire book to them. But if not, if you don't have that kind of time, then just use the pages as assigned in this lesson. So we're going to show the book, George versus George, and as you introduce the lesson, you're going to tell the students that you're going to learn about key events and people in the Revolutionary War. Now, the title is a little unusual, George versus George, so you can use the introduction on page 7 that will help students kind of explain what this means, understand what this means. There were once 2 enemies who were both named George. George Washington was the man who freed the American colonies from the British, and George III was the British king who lost them. Was King George a royal brute? American patriots said so, but others hailed him as the father of the people. Was George Washington a traitor? The king's supporters thought so, but many celebrated Washington as the father of his country. Who was right? There are 2 sides to every story. So once they understand what the title is all about, then we can look again at the American colonies map and have the students identify the colonies. Now, it's important to use the map locator and point that out to the students. The map locator is this small box at the bottom that shows the location of this map to the entirety of the United States and parts of North America. So students have a bigger picture of where this event took place. Then you're going to look at the world map, and with this one you're going to point out just sort of where the events took place, or all of the parties to it. Show them where England and Great Britain is here, the American colonies here, and the great distance between them, which is the Atlantic Ocean. So think about the difference in size of the countries, how far away they are, and where all of the actual fighting took place. So you're going to begin by reading pages 8 to 17. And as you do this, I will just show you some of those pages. It just gives you some background information about the events and what's happening. So we have information about a first glance at the 2 Georges, George Washington and King George. Then we'll also be talking about a look at the life of King George and his countrymen, so students can understand what life was like in England. And next, a look at the life of George Washington and his countrymen. So as you're showing and reading this, you can have students answer or think about things such as, how are the 2 men like and different? How was life in the colonies different from life in England? And last of all, it does compare the 2 governments. Government in England and how it worked, and how government worked in America. So this gives the students some background information as they enter into the lesson. So you can continue reading pages 28 to 29, which talk about the English taxes, the Boston Massacre, and brought both sides to the brink of war. The next important part to look at then is the Declaration of Independence, and that appears excuse me, on pages 36 to 37. Now, this gives information about why the Declaration was written, how it was written, and what it did, and what its effects were. Of importance on these pages that we'll actually be using later is this chart at the bottom, which shows some of the grievances the colonists had against King George. And after reading, you also want to make sure students understand this second paragraph here, where it talks about what were the reasons the Declaration was written. And that's basically because they wanted to rally the Americans to their cause, and they also wanted to try to gain support from other European countries. So these two pages are very important as we start to learn more about the Declaration of Independence. So then you're going to hand out copies of the Declaration. Now, the Declaration of Independence that they'll get is actually a transcript of that, and it does have some changes to it. First of all, it has some underlining. You'll see that there are different sections here underlined and underlined. Of course, underlining was not in the original document. And there have been some areas omitted, and it does tell them that some of the grievances, in all there were 27 grievances against the king, only the 11 that Rosalind Shancer had in her book are included here. So we do have a little bit of a difference. So it is not the actual document. Make sure they understand it. It is a transcription, and it has been changed in a few places. So with this, as you're reading these underlined sections, you might want to stop at the end of a phrase or a paragraph or a sentence, wherever you feel it's necessary, and ask the students, what do they think is being said? What is this all about? And so this is very important because later on, the students are going to be doing this by themselves in an assignment in a worksheet. So this is what it looks like in both. It's a 2-page document, and you see that it has both underlining in both places, and it does have the note saying where the items have been omitted. So after you have read through and had the students try to understand and explain and put in their own words what that document means, we're going to look at one part of that, and that's the abuses that of King George as written in the Declaration. Now, as I said earlier, there were 27, and it does say this on the document, but only 11 are listed here. They are the same 11 that we saw on this chart in the book George versus George. So this little exercise involves using this chart read by the teacher one at a time, and the students using their copy of the Declaration and comparing and trying to find how is it stated in the Declaration as opposed to what it means in everyday common words today. So this little exercise, again, is quite important because it models what the students will be doing later in an assignment. So we have a paper now that's titled The Democratic Principles and Ideals. And what it is basically the same underlined phrases that were explained and talked about as the students read the Declaration. They are now separated into individual ideas. And there's 2 pages of this, so they have about 8 of these to do. And what the students will do is read that. They can go back to the Declaration if they have any notes or anything there to help them. But in this column across, they're actually going to put what it means in their own words, so that we see that they have an understanding of the basic ideas of the Declaration of Independence. So once they've done, this is the second page you see here. After that, you'll collect the worksheet for assessment, and you're going to end this session by telling them that the next one we're going to learn more about the Revolutionary War, but we'll look more at George Washington and his involvement in that. So we're going to begin page 2? No, we'll begin session 2 with an introduction that kind of reviews what they've learned about the Declaration. Now, there are copies for you to project of the original 1776 Declaration that is very faded now, handwritten. And also you have a copy to project of the one that most people are more familiar with, and that's the 1823 engraved declaration that went out to the people. So using these two to start the discussion, talk a little bit about what the students remember about the Declaration from their Session 1 studies. Then we're going to look again at this map of the world and review exactly what we remember about England, Great Britain, and the American colonies. So talk about it, show them again where those things are located, where those places are located, and ask them, what is it between the two? It's the Atlantic Ocean. Well, would having to cross that ocean in sailing ships might have influenced the fighting in the war? And what would be some of the ways that it could have done so? They might also think about getting supplies to their soldiers. So we see that this Atlantic Ocean has become a geographic feature that has an impact on the Revolutionary War. And that is an introduction into learning this geographic idea, that the ocean is one example, but there are other geographic features that can influence events in a war. If they can identify them, fine. If not, help them out. There are, of course, mountains. Rivers would play a big part at this time. Swamps, if you had to fight in a swamp. The bays would be important for the Navy and to protect that. So those are all geographic features that influence events. Now, there are also physical systems and physical processes, such as the weather, the temperature. Those are all ways in which the geography could impact the war. So that's our idea that we're trying to get across now. So what we're going to do is look at this worksheet, and we'll take a look at it a little closer. This is the student notes worksheet. So as you continue to read the rest of the book, where we're talking about the battles and events of the war and the beginning of the new country's government, then we're going to have the students use this as a note-taking device. So at the bottom, the very last one you see is the physical features and processes and how they influenced the Revolutionary War. And I've given them the example of the Atlantic Ocean that we just talked about. So as they're reading, as they're listening to you read in most cases, they are going to pick out other geographic features that actually do influence the war. They have to have at least 3 when they're done listening to the story. Using this same worksheet, you're also going to mention that George Washington, of course, played a great part in the war. And so as they're listening, they also want to listen to and write down information about Washington and how he may have impacted events of the Revolutionary War. We'll do that with the top part of this worksheet. And this middle part then is listening whenever George Washington has an impact or anything to do with the beginning of the new country. So this is their sheet. As you continue reading, then you're going to have them fill it out. So you might want to pause as you read, give them some time to make sure they understand what you've read, what you've said, and that they can jot it down where they think it should be. So you're going to start today by reading a paragraph that kind of gives a little bit of a background about the remembering. We had the shot heard around the world, we had the battles, and now in this paragraph, the Constitutional Convention, the Continental Group has chosen George Washington to be the leader of their army. So we're going to continue reading. You see the different pages where we give all the students the time to record on their events. And once they have done that, and you've finished your reading, and they have had the chance to ask any questions or have you read over something, then you're going to have them use information from this chart to create a chart of their own. The chart will be only about the geographic influences. So they're going to use that information on the bottom of their notes chart. So they'll take that information and they're going to decide how to create a chart that shows those features and how they impacted it. So they should have 3 of them. And they should have, according to the directions, they should have a title. They should decide how it would look best on their paper. They should have a picture that shows what the feature was and how it impacted the government. The scoring guide is also there so that they can see what they will be assessed on. So once they have finished their charts, you're going to ask the students to share them. They're going to by doing the title, describing what they see, explaining what the feature or process is and how it did affect the war. And after that, you'll collect all the worksheets and the charts for assessment, and you can close by just having students asking them to think of one thing that they learned about the Revolutionary War that was new to them as they studied from the book. Our assessment, there's 4 parts to it. You'll see that the worksheets from the Declaration of Independence, the student notes worksheet, and also the graph, or the chart, as you might want to call it. The scoring guide for that will be for writing, geography, and also speaking and listening. Some of the extensions, well, I told you that you could read the entire book if you had time, but if you don't, you could also use it in another session to teach some other history concepts that our 5th graders are expected to know. And that's about the impact of King George, the significance of the Stamp and Tea Acts, the Boston Massacre, and also the battles of Lexington and Concord, Saratoga, and Yorktown. So all of those history performance objectives could be taught by using other sections of this book. If you want to learn more about or share more about the Declaration of Independence, it has some very interesting facts on the National Archives website that's listed here. If you'd like to have the students learn more about George Washington, the Mount Vernon website has some interesting information there. And last of all, if you'd prefer, the students could create their posters using technology. And here is one site that gives some ideas on how to do that. So our sources, again, are the book by Rosalind Shancer and the Declaration from the National Archives. So I hope you enjoy using the lesson. Thank you.